Welcome to our second session where we will be covering our UNGA terminology and what they mean, as well as the workflow overview being the steps we'll be taking as we work through the system. So starting off with our UNGA terminology, which we will see more of as we work through our workflow next. So we'll start with our spaces. So as you can see here, spaces refers to the event space or spaces being used for the event. So for example, if you've got a conference on and they've booked meeting room 1, breakout room 2, it lists all of the spaces that the event has booked within it. So it can be one, it can be a multiple spaces or rooms would typically be your normal terminology, but in this system you'll notice that the key terminology here is spaces. So these will be the spaces that are booked for a particular event. So next we'll move on to booking. So you'll notice once you've booked an event that there is a bookings tab. So this lists all of your reserved spaces. So while space refers to the individual spaces you have available, bookings refers to those that have been booked for that particular event. So that terminology will kind of flow on. So once you've booked your spaces, they will now be listed as a booking of that particular event. Next off, we have accounts, fairly self-explanatory. So this refers to the companies or the individuals organising or booking the event. So it can be a company for a corporate event, or alternatively an individual being potentially a wedding. So Brad and Mary are getting married, however they will be the account as the main booking contact. So flowing on from accounts, we'll move to contacts. So referring to the individual contact or contacts within an organisation. So we have a contact of an account. So say we're working with a particular organisation being the account, however we're liaising directly with this said contact. So those contacts are stored as contacts of an account. So next off, we've got functions. So the functions refers to the breakdown of the components of your event. So listing out all of the items that you need and that will be happening for your event. So listing out guest arrival, client bump in, morning tea, dinner, all of your components within that one event. So functions will be used quite heavily in outlining the details and greater components of each event. So within our functions, we have service orders. So these are essentially sales orders. So listing out all of the items and equipment that you'll be providing to the client, both charged and uncharged, forming the basis of your event order. So these service orders are attached to a particular function. So whether that function be morning tea served, that service order will be attached with a breakdown of the items that need to be served at that time, which leads us into our next item there being service order items. So service order items sit within the service order. So service order being the overall sales order, the items being the breakdown of all of the goods being provided. So whether that be equipment, when referring to the function line room setup, or food items or staffing, so labour costs, all of those will be set up as service order items. So once a service order is created, the system automatically creates a work order, which is essentially a service order broken down into department. So it's essentially a record of the delivery responsibility to a single department. So whilst we won't work too heavily within work orders, as I mentioned, these are automatically created when we add a service order, and it will come into play when it comes to the conclusion of the event, and we need to complete and close our work orders. So these just list out where your goods are sitting within a single department. So that covers our key terminology, which, as I said, you'll begin to see as we move on to workflow, and as you start to become more familiar with the software, these key terminologies will become second to none. You become quite familiar with them. So if we move on now to workflow overview. So while this might look complicated, I assure you, it is quite a simple process. So essentially, the Flex Edition that you've purchased comes with a pre-configured standard workflow. So this encapsulates the following components. You'll see a list here. However, I will just highlight that the core workflow areas start with our accounts. So our CRM, who the event is for. So accounts, moving on to events. So the events that these individual accounts are holding. Their orders being the next core component, followed by invoicing. So we obviously need payment and funds for that event and those orders that they have purchased. So starting at the front here, we've got accounts. So once an account contacts us, they will book an event. So moving into bookings and events, they will book certain spaces for a particular event. So within the event, as mentioned with our functions previously in terminology, we'll have a list of function scripting. So being all of the core functionality of that event, what's happening, who's coming, all of the details sits within the function scripting, which then flows onto our orders, so our service orders. Those are attached to our function lines included in our function scripting. Those orders then need to be attached to a payment plan. So typically we don't get an event booking the week before an event, so there will be a series of payments. So essentially putting those orders onto a payment plan where we can then issue a breakdown of invoices. So being the deposit, a second installment, a third installment, however many payments, but those orders all sit within this one payment plan, and we can then follow on to the next invoicing from that. So the payment plans are generated based on the orders and the pricing in those. So whether it be the first deposit being 25% of the total ordered, we'll then invoice that one. So once we have finished off the event and wanting to issue our final invoice, we need to then go through and close the event and our orders. So that is our key workflow, and is very much built within the intention to follow industry best practice and cover off a shorter implementation span. So these are our core functionality, which will become a lot more prominent as we move through this onboarding series and cover each step. So this is essentially moving on is our hierarchy. So the level of detail gets more complex as you progress. So starting at the top here, we have our booking calendar. So our booking calendar is where we are able to book our spaces. So it is a list of our spaces and it will show availability. So what we do when we go through to the booking calendar is book either a single space or multiple spaces and add them to an event. So from that add event window, we then need to assign an account, whether it be for a wedding or a corporate event. We need to assign an account. So who will be hosting this event, and then if there is a contact of that account. So for a corporate event, it will be this organization being our account, and this key contact as our contact. So the person we'll be liaising with. And similarly for a wedding or private event, we'll have the account as the individual, and then the contact will then flow on from that. So once we've added our event, we are then able to go into a lot more detail within the edit event. So essentially, for the simple purpose of booking an event, we need a space, we need an event name, we need an account, a contact, and a date, which is all being covered off through our booking calendar and add event process. And then we're able to save that event. So once we have a little bit more detail, we then move through to the edit event stage. So adding our function lines, so times, spaces, what's happening where. So we'll cover off our agenda, our room setup, perhaps our AV setup, any kind of breakout rooms. So we list all of those key components and what times they'll be delivered at in what particular spaces. So that's all covered off in our function scripting. So that is a high level detail of our functions. We then go through and add service orders to our relevant function lines. So for example, we've got room set up here. We'll go through and add a service order and then list out the service order items that will be delivered. So listing out our chairs, our tables, any kind of equipment or room setup specifications that this particular event needs, we'll attach those to the relevant room setup function line. So as I mentioned, our work order is automatically created when we add a service order. So that just sections it out into departments. So that would be into our resources. So we can list out all of those items within there via our price list. So that essentially covers off our end-to-end workflow and hierarchy chart. So just a quick recap being we book a space, a particular space from our booking calendar. We'll then follow through and add the event details, our account, contact, and save our event. So that is now all booked in the system. And then we're able to go through and add a higher level of detail, being the functionality of the event, the items that are being delivered, our food packages, all of those items are able to be broken down in our function scripting by attaching service orders and service order items. So without overloading you with any more terminology, that concludes the end-to-end workflow session. Our next session will be looking at our booking calendar and how to book an event. So we'll be putting our end-to-end workflow into best practice, and we can run through exactly how to do that. Thank you.